So the old world is collapsing, but simultaneously a new world, a new human is being birthed. Thus the planet finds itself right now in liminality, in between planes. The supernal light is fast seeping through. The veil is lifting, but it can still be a struggle to see the new, and especially to be the new. But let this not be cause for discouragement. At no point in the history of our race and our planet has it been more imperative to persevere in the process of awakening. With time, as the awakening to the vision that all is one becomes more stable and established, more embodied and experiential, so too will our lives begin to enter into alignment and coherency. We simply become more and more who we really are, who we really always have been. Love itself, peace, joy, abundance, and above all, awakening sets us radically free. The statement, all is one, contains no exceptions, no ambiguity. It is a literal truth. However, the formless one manifests as an infinite variety of forms, illusions, and disguises. But there is always only the one. The one, moreover, is never arbitrarily cruel or gratuitous, but always manifesting through supreme love and wisdom. It will present whatever is needed to bring each living being, who is ultimately inseparable from itself, to a realization of the truth of who they really are. In the discussion that follows, I will be exploring oneness in terms of the 5 notions that I consider to be the most relevant to the current human awakening, namely source, soul, mind, body, and ego. An understanding of how these relate to each other will help with the process of their integration and with the realization of their essential oneness. So beginning with source then. Source refers to that singular intelligence that pervades and constitutes everything. It is pure consciousness beyond time and space, utterly still and unchanging. It is the only reality, our true nature. Everything then, all phenomena, all thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, all are happening in and by the power of Source. They have no existence whatsoever in themselves. Source, pure consciousness, simply is. It is infinite potentiality, and the vibration of its being manifests reality within consciousness. Reality is thus Source, revealing, showing itself. And this reality is unified and functions in perfect harmony. Ignorance, however, distorts the vision and the experiencing of reality, and generates its own unreality, contracted and dense. So turning now to the relation of source to our souls are ultimately inseparable from source. They are vibrational complexes, vibrational signatures within the one consciousness of source. They are, we could say, contracted versions of source, with limited awareness of their true nature. The soul is thus distinct from source, even though it is inseparable from it. And the often used analogy that likens the soul to a wave and source to the ocean continues to be a valid one. And we could say that souls are processes through which source, over countless lives, hides itself from itself and eventually reveals itself to itself. Souls thus trace illusory journeys through which source appears to separate from itself and gradually return to itself. And I say illusory here because both source separating from itself and returning to itself are impossibilities. The apparent separation and return only happen at the level of illusion, as do the equally illusory concepts of time and space through which the separation and return appear to proceed. And this illusory process of separation is generated primarily by the soul's ignorance of its eternal unity with Source, and its belief that it inhabits the realm of time, space, matter, and death. As noted, it is only gradually, over many lifetimes, that the illusory process begins to reverse, and the soul eventually returns to Source, to the eternal now. Or rather, perhaps it would be more accurate to say that the soul arrives at the realization that it was never separate from Source in the first place, that it never actually went anywhere. And souls find themselves at different stages of the process of the realization of this truth. Now, previous to arriving at the realization of its true nature and unity with Source, the soul identifies itself with the mind, the body, and the ego. The mind and body are, for the most part, neutral. They are vehicles, tools, or instruments through which the soul processes and experiences the world. The ego then arises when the unawakened soul identifies with the body and the mind. And the ego is nothing more than a self-concept, a bundle of thoughts, memories, and beliefs. It is, we could say, the unawakened soul's temporary sense of I and mine. I am this body, I am this mind, this body is mine, this mind is mine. The ego thus exists and maintains its existence by defining itself against the other, by defining itself against what it perceives as not me. It is the mind's primary device for upholding its sense of separation. The important paradox, or the irony to note here, is that it is through the use of the body-mind-ego apparatus to experience thought, meanings, duality, and separation that the soul eventually awakens to non-dual reality, to its true nature and unity with Source. In short, the soul awakens to reality through its experience of illusion in the ordinary, everyday 3D world. Hence, to a great extent, the soul comes to know what it really is through the experiencing of what it is not. And this happens through the soul's constant exposure via body and mind to the enantiodromia of the everyday 3D world. And the term enantiodromia, understood here as the play of opposites, the ubiquitous shifting from one opposite to the other which the soul encounters in the world. The shifting of darkness to light, hot to cold, sadness to joy, and so forth. Eventually, however, the soul reconciles and transcends opposition. And this reconciliation and transcendence of the opposites is at the core of the process of awakening, of unity consciousness, and the realization of oneness. And I'll have a bit more to say about this later. Right now, I'd just like to briefly interrupt my presentation to remind you that if you're enjoying this talk and finding it useful, to please take a moment to consider subscribing to the channel, as this is a new channel and it would help us to grow and reach a larger audience. Thank you. So to return now to the presentation, we could say that the present moment thus has two distinct but inseparable components: formlessness and form. Source is the formless and its manifestations is the form. Source, the formless, is eternal and unchanging. The form, the manifestation, however, is temporary and changeful relative to the soul's level of awakening and to its vibrational signature. Souls which are advanced in the awakening process tend to manifest coherencies, that is, high vibrational qualities that correspond to the eternal nature of Source: love, wisdom, peace, compassion, and so forth. Whereas unawakened souls, by contrast, manifest incoherencies, dense, low vibrational forms that are incongruent, we could say, with their true nature. However, and this is important, whatever might be the form that is manifested, it will always be the one that best serves that soul in its journey of awakening, or in the deepening of its awakening, if already awakened. All forms of manifestation, then, wealth or poverty, joy or sadness, pain or suffering, ultimately work towards the soul's growth, even though it might not seem that way to the ego and its judgments. The ego will accept some forms of manifestations, but resist others, notably those manifestations involving pain and suffering. Conversely, the more awakened soul, which is less identified with the ego, will be more accepting of whatever form the present moment might manifest. due to the fact that the more awakened soul has the insight that no matter what the present moment might present, it is still only source manifesting itself in the form that is ultimately most conducive to the growth of that soul. Thus, even behind the illusion of the world, behind pain and suffering, we find the wisdom and love of Source, invariably manifesting for the good of all. And this again corresponds to the fundamental premise that all is one. It is all Source, albeit at times heavily contracted, dense, and disguised. Everything thus works together at all levels to bring about awakening and the return to unity. Everything then is thus a process of Source revealing itself to itself, even though in reality there is no process, because there is no time. There is only the eternal now of Source. So it is to the same measure that the soul awakens that the ego's dominance of the mind and of the body diminishes, and the mind and body begin to shift from being slaves of the ego to becoming servants of the soul and of Source. The mind, body and ego do not survive death. The soul, however, remains untouched by death. But unawakened souls, that is, souls who have yet not realized their identity as pure consciousness, will retain mental impressions from their incarnations, even after death. And these mental impressions, with which unawakened souls identify with, will determine their vibrational frequencies, indicate the stage of awakening the soul finds itself at, and will also shape their next incarnation. By contrast to this, souls who have awakened during an incarnation or at the point of death will not be identified with those mental impressions and will not reincarnate, thus ending their cycle of death and rebirth. An exception to this, however, are those awakened souls who voluntarily choose to incarnate in order to assist other incarnated souls in their awakening process. Now let me return to the notion of the opposites, which I touched on earlier. The opposites, the divided dual mind and its perception of separation, form the basis of the ego's illusory existence. Without separation and opposition, the ego cannot survive. The story of Adam and Eve in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis, I think wonderfully illustrates the birth of the human ego. We note that the tree which God forbids Adam and Eve to eat from is referred to as the tree of good and evil. That is, the tree of duality, the tree of the opposites. As soon as Adam and Eve eat the fruit from the forbidden tree, they are banished from paradise, cast down to earth, and become subject to time, matter, and death. However, this apparent separation from God and eternity, which marks the birth of the ego, separation, and duality, only happens at the level of illusion. In reality, there is no separation, no time, no death. We are where and what we have always been. The perfect happiness of an eternal now. In reality, we are still in paradise. Most of humanity, however, continue to be caught up in the illusion of separation and opposition, entangled in matter, time, and death, judging this to be good and that to be bad, and so forth. This is all a function of the egoic mind. And as already noted, even in the dual 3D world of separation, the present moment and whatever it might manifest is always ultimately perfect. It is Source itself presenting in its infinite wisdom what is best in that particular moment of time. Yet the ego, with its judgments of this is good, but this is bad, and so on, thinks it knows better than Source as to what should be and what should not be. Thus, at the heart of awakening lies the need to overcome the illusion and transcend the opposites, transcend duality. In other words, the need to recognize our true nature as unity consciousness, as one. The realization of unity consciousness or oneness opens a third optic, sometimes also referred to as the third eye or the Ajna chakra. When this third optic opens, we see Source, we see God everywhere and in everything. It is the beatific vision while still in the body. Interestingly, as I have touched on in a previous video, is the story of our origin, Adam and Eve in Genesis, represents the beginning of duality and separation, the beginning of time and death, then the last book of the Bible, Revelation, represents the end of duality, the transcendence of the opposites and the overcoming of time and death. Thus, in the last book of the Bible, in Revelation, the resurrected and ascended Christ, pronouncing himself as the unifier of the opposites, says, "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last." By bringing together the opposites of Alpha and Omega, of beginning and end, of first and last, Christ thus unifies and transcends the opposites and destroys time and death. And the beginning, paradise in the book of Genesis, is now also the end, the New Jerusalem in Revelation. Everything in between the beginning, Genesis, and the end, Revelation, that is, the passage of time itself, is rendered an illusion. In reality, nothing ever happened between the beginning and the end, between Genesis and Revelation. We are where we have always been, in the bliss and wholeness of the eternal now, utterly inseparable from Source. So the fruits of awakening are many, and the awakened conduct themselves in life in very different ways to those still caught up in illusion. Primarily, there is a resting, an abidance in the awareness of Source, And this is balanced with a sense of detached witnessing or observation, especially the observation of thoughts. As awakening deepens and one's vibration elevates, thoughts begin to reflect this higher vibration and alignment with Source. Above all, as noted, there comes a deep sense of acceptance to whatever the present moment presents. And this is accompanied by a greater ability to calmly respond rather than react to difficult situations. This is not to say that the ego is no longer active in the awakened, but rather it's more a case of the ego having been recognized as insubstantial and thus losing its power and dominance over the mind. Awakening, moreover, does not only serve the individual soul, it also introduces more light into the collective, thus making it easier for others to awaken. But even the apparent chaos we see in the world around us can also serve as a driver for more people to awaken. And even as the global situation appears as increasingly intolerable, the awakened soul rests in the knowledge that ultimately everything is working together for the good of all. So if you're still here, thank you for watching. And again, if you have found the content useful and enjoyable, please consider liking and subscribing, as this will be a huge help for the channel. Thank you.